Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called The Preacher's Wife. So, really going into this movie, there's some interesting characters, some very much interesting developments going on into this movie. So, ultimately, when I remember this movie, I usually remember Gregory Himes, which ultimately I've seen him in the movie Running Scared with Billy Crystal. God, that's such a big favorite of mine, and ultimately in time I'll probably get to it. But yeah, definitely that, or probably even even to movies like White Castle, where ultimately Gregory Himes and another gentleman were kind of like competitively dancing with one another in some room somewhere. It was kind of fun to ultimately like see two different kind of styles clash with one another at some point in time. But besides that, this movie is a very much overwhelming feel good movie. I like the fact that reasonably you have this kind of be like a It's a Wonderful Life kind of movie, or maybe a Nicolas Cage, The Family Man kind of, like one person coming to help out a Reverend, named Henry Biggs. So we have we have a family that, when watching this, is like it kind of gives me those like warm like Christmas vibes. Of course, like this will feel like a Christmas movie, but like to me, you could watch this almost any time of the year, even though in all actuality they're like winter and stuff like that. But so going into this movie, we have it to where Reverend Henry Biggs is starting to run out of money, run out of funds. And so when going into this, the one person that he is turning to is Gregory Himes' character, Joe Hamilton, that is thinking about re re-establishing a different kind of environment, thinking about putting it into the putting his land into a different kind of setup for the future, and ultimately the church is sadly one of those. We have it to where ultimately, funny enough, we have at points in time within this movie where you can see a lot of people just consistently having fun. And I think that is the real thing about this movie, is just a lot of people having fun. A lot of people just like dancing it out and looking awkward, and like everyone's having fun in this movie. That is the true appeal of this film, is everyone is just doing these roles and taking it and having fun with it. Maybe Reverend Henry Biggs's character might have a difficulty with having fun, just because reasonably there's Denzel Washington's character, which is Dudley, that is kind of counteracting that to make for funny moments. Going into this, like I'm interested that Whitney Houston had like so many like song moments when looking at the movie like Bodyguard. She of course did the soundtrack for that. So going into this, I guess she must just like doing movies that she could also sing as well. Or sadly, Whitney Houston passed away. So, anyways, we have it to where in this movie we are getting to the aspect of desperation, hoping everything is going to go right, and Dudley comes in to bring a happy excuse me bring a helping hand, because ultimately for me Dudley kind of reminds me of Al from Quantum Leap, kind of the person that is gonna steer Sam Beckett's character to his right destination. And if Sam can't do it himself, then Al is going to take it upon himself to help out the situation in this circumstances. I know a lot of people haven't seen Quantum Leap. That might be some old references for some people, but you know what? I love Quantum Leap. It's a great show. It's a really well-rounded show. So, are going into here, it does also kind of feel like the movie that I recently saw, The Crow, with Ernie Hudson. And because at some points in time, like looking at it, without the whole vengeance part of The Crow, we have it to where this person, Dudley, is touching people and making them stop smoking, helping them to realize that there are things they need to do. Whether they need to be poked, whether they need to be prodded, but at the end of the day, eventually, he hopes they'll do them. So, going into this, let's go into spoilers about this movie. There might not be a lot to say about this film, but like I think that it's just fun. If a lot of people don't care about this movie, that's completely okay. At the end of it. So, let's go into spoilers about this movie, because this movie is just fun. It's not meant to be anything besides that, and hopefully, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, it's kind of interesting within this film for Whitney Houston to, like, it seemed like they had to figure out a way to write in these musical moments for Whitney Houston. But interestingly enough, we have a really funny moment in the beginning of this movie that I got a good chuckle out of. So Reverend Henry Biggs steps up to the podium, and while he is saying his speech, you have the choir in the background just like mimicking the stuff that he's saying, to the point where he is ultimately just consistently just like he's doing his speech, and then all of a sudden he says one thing, and then he turns back way quickly to ultimately just see if anybody's going to say anything. And I think that starting out of this movie is probably the best part of the film. Because, yeah, you're knowing right away that this movie is going to be fun, it's going to be a comedy, and it's going to be, like, uplifting or feel good. So, going much more so into this movie, as I always have transitional words, we have Dudley appear seemingly out of nowhere to ultimately tell the Reverend that he is ultimately going to help him out. seemingly out of nowhere, Denzel Washington appears. Really, the Reverend takes a while to buy into this whole thing, and really he's not taking the bait, and ultimately it seems like every single time Denzel Denzel's character interjects, we have it to where Henry Biggs is going to just make Denzel's character look like a schlub in some ways, because when Denzel just goes and tries to get a pizza, Denzel mentions, or Dudley mentions, that he's like trying to work with this Reverend, and like it's not going so well, and the person at the pizza spot is like, oh yeah, this Reverend, because this Reverend knows everybody. You can't walk through this town without somebody knowing the Reverend, and I think that that is a great thing, that this guy has pitched in so much everywhere to everybody, that like there's always this real like build up of this character, because there's a build up of this character because of how basically Dudley is going to consistently uh in some ways tear him down, sadly. Because there's going to be points in time where Dudley's character is going to want time with Julia Biggs, which is ultimately Whitney Houston. He is he's Dudley is wanting to do the right thing, but then also he wants to have one last moment of bliss, because when going into this, he's really just realizing how minimal that he has time for within this job to be completed. And more than likely, his job could be simple, could be difficult. It all depends on how the Reverend is going to kind of like stall whatever Dudley's doing. Funny enough, like Dudley went to the Biggs household and like started working on like their reports, and started to want to go to the Reverend's meetings, and ultimately tried to help around the house by, when the Reverend is not home, by taking Julia either out to a club or have her go ice skating, and with their the big son, which ultimately we find out uh, he had a brother of sorts within this movie, Hakeem. Um, we have it in here that there is one night where the chorus is practicing together, and while they are practicing, more and more they are realizing that smoke is starting to arise from the building. Nobody quite knows what it is at first, but then eventually Whitney Houston's character Julia comes to the conclusion that the boiler had burst. So reasonably, everybody's like scattering out of the church like crazy. Man, do we have an interesting moment of desperation after that whole boiler room burst, because reasonably they think that the boiler room is ending up just going to do the Biggs family in, sadly. So we have it to where in this movie that Dudley is going to try to otherwise sway Gregory Himes' character, Joe Hamilton. And funny enough, you have these like ghost like moments, these poltergeist like moments where Gregory Himes' character is ultimately going through his home. And he's like, whoa, like this is kind of weird. Because Dudley is ultimately kind of telling him that he is going to help out the Biggs family. And in a very like Scrooge like manner, Gregory Himes is like, "Oh no, you're not gonna scare me." All while going and looking at his piano playing by itself, ultimately looking at his radio that is unplugged, and just going, "Oh yeah, you're not gonna scare me." Okay, sure, all right. So we have in this movie good moments where it's comedic purposes. Like I said before, Henry, when his family is going ice skating, he's desperate to try to beat the traffic to make it there to get to them. And there's this moment of red light, red light, red light. He can't make it, sadly. So he's just wanting to just push on home and just be like, yeah, I'm late again. I tried. Believe me, I tried. But eventually we get good moments with Henry Biggs, because after all these kind of these slight like moments, here's a really nice and sweet moment where ultimately Dudley forcibly provides, because we have the Reverend that is going to deliver some food to less fortunate, and he has a bunch of baskets that he's going to try to bring to this home. Eventually the Reverend ends up slipping. Julia ends up walking out there to help him, and she also slips, all by the power of Dudley and his like spiritual blowing of air out of his mouth. So, but the funny moments are still there. Like especially, I love the point when Denzel's character is looking at a photo of Henry and Julia, and he changes it to look like him. And then there's a thunder crack, and then he changes it back. Funny enough, we also have Henry Biggs who like throws Dudley's book out. He throws it out, and all of a sudden, like there's a real crackle because ultimately that is his angel handbook. So we have it within here that Julia is almost at some point when seeing Dudley, like she mentions to her mother, which, God, like her mother in this movie, who I ultimately right now cannot find, uh, ultimately, God, I love this actress. Like she always plays this very firm and very commanding presence. I always liked that about her. Whenever I've seen her in a film. Oh yeah, Jennifer Lewis. I apologize. And then also we have Loretta Denis or Divine, who ultimately plays Beverly. That is also a really good character. Like I like these two, both these two actors, whenever they play characters, they really normally play powerhouse like character, not powerhouse in the fact of like when they're on screen, their performance is always memorable. It's how it always is. So going back into this, we have eventually to where the reverend is forcibly making a bow out like speech. He's kind of thinking about things to ultimately say, to ultimately mention to people that the church is going to close because they don't have the money to put together to afford to keep the church going, especially after the whole boiler room situation. So we have the Reverend at the tail end of this, forcibly still, when looking at the teleprompter, going in here to mention to people that the church is going to close. He can't bring himself to say it. He can't. He instead goes into a very cheerful like speech that like gets everybody all jazzed up, and everybody's just like, man, like I feel something moving. Ultimately, uh, Henry Biggs mentions the Angels, and of course, Denzel, of course, is like, yeah, he mentioned us. We have an interesting moment that we see Gregory Hines, Joe Hamilton's character, sitting in the church. And we're like, wow, is he gonna change his mind? Is he gonna help out? We hope so. We hope so. But yeah, this movie is a fun film, and we ultimately have a journey where people are trying to figure out how to also like give people a second chance. We have some people within this movie where ultimately Henry Biggs goes and give a boy a second chance because maybe when looking at him and talking to him honestly, it sounds like he is a innocent, and so ultimately lets him go home for the holidays. We ultimately have it to where Jeremiah Biggs is ultimately asking for his brother, and eventually he gets his brother for the holidays. It's a really warm movie. So I think with that, that's really all that I can mention. It's a fun film. What can I say more than that? It really has like even Lionel Richie in this film, which ultimately, when kind of looking at him, you have to kind of like is that Lionel Richie? Yeah, it is. Like I wonder if like he was actually a part of the soundtrack because it seemed like they were trying to like let people know the behind the scenes of just like, okay, well, yeah, like most of the music Whitney Houston, but then also Lionel Richie comes in. So with that, I think that's all that I really have much to say. I know normally I would go for like an hour or 2 hours or talk about a film for an adjustable amount of lengths. But I think really for this one, it's like it's a fun movie. And that's all I have to say. There's not much more than that. Cause or otherwise I'll have transitional words and goofy like sayings, but there is a good feeling movie in here. There's quite a bit of jokes. You have it to where Whitney Houston at some point in time, when looking at Dudley, ultimately she mentions window shopping. It's like, man, how far down the rabbit hole has this family gone? But her mother tells her, her mother tells her, Margaret Coleman tells her, the family mother, because Biggs. Anyways, she ultimately mentions that it's like, well, hey, like, you can go window shopping, but don't put any money in your pocket, or you can go window shopping, but don't buy anything. Like that kind of funny joke in there. It's probably where I want to really leave off here. I know probably a lot of people like 30 minutes, 26 minutes. You should have got a whole 30. You should have got a whole hour. Yeah, this one's a little bit harder to get to any moments of which to stretch anything. So I hope people will like this review. I hope people will be reminded about this movie, knowing full well that probably a lot of people will maybe see this, and that's completely fine. So I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.